That's right. Today is the day you think it is. It is, of course, the anniversary of the premiere of Law & Order on NBC in 1990, so it only seemed natural that this episode of At the Movies be about the top IMDb-rated cop drama, 7, against the top-rated courtroom drama, 12 Angry Men. Surely there isn't a more obvious comparison to do on Friday the 13th.
Can I buy some pot from you?
Well, if you're familiar with this genre, you will know these categories may have to be changed up a bit. So instead of the hero, we'll go with... Friday the 13th has Adrienne King as Alice. There is a little blurring of the line of who the final girl will be, with Annie being the central focus of the beginning. Alice doesn't even pop up until about 14 minutes in. One thing that makes this movie interesting is how her role as the main protagonist isn't clear throughout the movie. She is just one of the campers, and likely the next victim of the killer. It isn't until the smoke clears that you realize she is the final girl. The real disadvantage to this approach is that there isn't much to her character. She is largely just another one of the campers until the end, when she has to face the monster mano a mano. A Nightmare on Elm Street has Heather Langenkamp as Nancy Thompson. Again, there's a little blurring of the final girl here as well, with Tina being the primary focus at the beginning of the movie. But once she dies, it quickly becomes apparent that Nancy is the protagonist here. Nancy is easily the second most famous final girl behind Laurie Strode from Halloween. She is also one of the most proactive final girls.
Booby traps and improvised anti-personnel devices? Well, what are you reading that for?
I'm into survival.
She is the one that develops a way to attack Freddy and takes her plan and turns it into a reality. Usually the final girl just ends up running away and stumbling across a way to beat their enemy. Nancy actually has to set up her plan and draw Freddy out to enact it. There are storytelling advantages to hiding your main character like Friday the 13th did. One of the originators, and probably the movie that executed this approach the best, was the original Psycho. However, one of them is not the creation of an engaging character. This is an easy win for Nightmare.
Come on, Freddy. Can't you catch me?
Nightmare on Elm Street has Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger. Before I go any further, it's worth noting these movies, and very few in their genre, are known for the skills of their actors. Even the original Halloween, which is the movie that gave the world Jamie Lee Curtis, who went on to have a very significant career after that movie, has a lot of bad acting in it.
He was standing right there.
Poor Laurie. Scared another one away.
The exception to this rule is Robert Englund, who is an extremely skilled actor, putting his significant chops into making Freddy a menacing presence. The child molester, who was burned to death by the town, now seeks to punish the children of those who burned him. It's all fairly dark, as you would expect. Englund takes the role and makes it his own. This is where it gets tricky, because Englund isn't the only exception in the acting category. Another big exception is Betsy DeVos as the Secretary of Education, a woman who seeks to torture children through disgusting means by funneling money away from local schools and turning that money over to private businesses.
And so you will enforce the gainful employment rule to make sure that these career colleges are not cheating students?
We will certainly review that rule.
Bullshit. No, wait, that's not right. Betsy Palmer is Pamela Voorhees, a woman who seeks to torture children through disgusting means by slowly killing them one by one. That sounds better, though both seem fairly evil. But I digress. Betsy Palmer is actually really good as well. As a mother who lost her son in Crystal Lake, he drowned while the camp counselors that should have been watching him were fornicating instead.
Jason should have been watched every minute. He wasn't a very good swimmer.
Why? I don't know. I've always just loved to kill. I've really enjoyed it.
So now she kills the camp counselors at Crystal Lake in revenge for the death of her son. Still, at the end of the day, Freddy is really incredibly memorable. The fact that even Jackie Earle Haley couldn't make this character work is a testament to how good Englund is. This incarnation got 8 movies, and it's clear why. Point for Nightmare.
Please, God.
This is God.
Both these movies happen to feature before they are famous actors as the killer's victims. Friday the 13th has Kevin Bacon as Jack. So, there's supposed to be 6 degrees. So, I was a PA on the horror movie The Dead Matter. That movie starred Jason Carter, who was on Babylon 5. Babylon 5 also starred Stephen Furst, who was on Animal House with Kevin Bacon. Jack is a very interesting and deep and well thought out character with real emotions and an arc that arguably drives the entire franchise forward.
You serious?
That's a complete lie. He's just another kid in a slasher movie that has sex and dies. I guess that cliche wasn't established so much, so you can't really hold it against this movie. But yeah, it's about the most common storyline for a character in these movies. Even George McFly falls victim to it.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's corkscrew? No. This can't be happening!
Here's a major problem with the original Friday the 13th. None of these characters are noteworthy. I can read you their names and the actors that play them, but they are all fairly interchangeable. The only one of significance is Jack, only because he's played by Kevin Bacon. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, we get the very first feature film role for Johnny Depp, where he decides to demonstrate why guys shouldn't wear midriffs.
No! No, 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 no! No.
That's nice of him. He plays Glenn, Nancy's boyfriend. The kill count is relatively low here. There's Amanda Wyss as Tina, Jisoo Garcia as Rod, and Ronee Blakley as Marge Thompson, aka Nancy's mom. We also have John Saxon as Nancy's dad, who survives this movie. Rod and Tina have sex and end up dead. I know, big twist. Then Glenn dies. Then Marge ends up as Freddy's final victim right at the end. There's an actual backstory for the parents here, as they were responsible for killing Freddy, which takes them far too long to confess to Nancy. However, the fact that Freddy is attacking her in her sleep does seem rather far-fetched, so it does make sense how for so long they would assume him coming back would be impossible. I also brought up the acting before. Neither movie really has great acting outside the villain, but the performances are all significantly better in Nightmare. This isn't a hard choice at all. Point for Nightmare.
It's just a sleepover date, Rod. Glenn was just leaving.
You see his face? You see his face?
These movies are interesting in how closely related they are. They are both inspired by 1978's Halloween. However, they take the idea in very different directions. Friday the 13th essentially strips all the supernatural elements, mostly, to create a very bare-bones slasher. A Nightmare on Elm Street took the mild supernatural elements and took them to the maximum, creating a purely supernatural killer.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Friday the 13th resembles Halloween the closest because they are both limited budget movies. But it's clear both Friday and Nightmare were clearly inspired by Halloween, and both franchises took the ideas of that movie in very different directions. Unfortunately, it also makes Friday the 13th a much more shallow story. It's mostly about teenagers being horny and acting like idiots until the ending, where we get the backstory about Jason's death driving Pamela and giving her a revenge motive. It is more grounded than these movies usually are, having no supernatural elements until a quick moment at the end. At best, it's a movie about discouraging kids from having sex because that ends up being what most of the victims have in common, except when they don't, like Annie at the beginning. I think attributing themes to this movie might be overthinking it. A Nightmare on Elm Street has a revenge slant as well, Freddy going after the children of the people who killed him. Of course, since he's already dead, he is now a strictly supernatural entity. He attacks the kids in their dreams, allowing him a fairly free rein to really get creative with his attacks. Unfortunately, we don't really see how creative this premise can be until the third movie, but here at least starred the idea, which was cool. Quite simply, A Nightmare on Elm Street wins this point very easily, again because it actually has a story that runs throughout, besides kids acting stupid and occasionally dying. Point for Nightmare.
Well, what if they meet a monster in their dreams? Then what?
They turn their back on it, take away its energy, and it disappears.
From a soundtrack perspective, this has to go to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Both movies have iconic themes that are incredibly memorable. In fact, the Friday main theme is slightly more memorable. But literally, the rest of the score is so much stronger for Nightmare that makes it not even close. While most of the music for Friday is fairly generic, there is some truly awful music early on in the film for no reason. Sound design also has to go to Nightmare simply for the sounds of Freddy's claws. Friday has nothing really of note sound design-wise, so this ends up being another win for Nightmare. Friday the 13th has some really great makeup work. This is largely done by Tom Savini, who I just remembered was in The Dead Matter. So I was a PA on The Dead Matter, which starred Tom Savini, who did makeup for Friday the 13th, which featured Kevin Bacon. Wait. Kevin Bacon was actually in A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise was in The Outsiders with...
Pain don't hurt.
So where was I? The visuals. There is some great makeup gore work here. It's fantastic and one of the huge highlights of this movie. Friday spends a lot of time following the teenagers in camp with shots at a distance to go for the whole "they're being watched" vibe, which gets to feel overused very quickly. And Nightmare on Elm Street doesn't have gore makeup quite as good as Friday the 13th, but it is effective. What it lacks in that department, it makes up in raw creativity. Freddy reaching through the ceiling is a real highlight. The dream aspect really allows for some crazy stuff. This, again, is a point that has to go to Nightmare. This is actually the closest these two movies are in comparison. Which movie is the best at horror? If we judge strictly on body count, Friday the 13th is a clear winner. If we judge strictly the killer torturing his victims, that's a Nightmare on Elm Street. So instead, let's ask which is the more terrifying idea? A killer coming out of nowhere to murder you, or a killer infecting your dreams who can kill you there? The whole dream angle is fascinating. Freddy can only get you while you're asleep, but how can you avoid going to sleep? You're going to have to eventually, and staying up when you are exhausted is a truly torturous thing.
How long's it been since you slept?
It's coming up on the 7th day. It's okay, I checked Guinness. The record's 11.
A typical horror rule to avoid the killer is not to be by yourself. Yet how can you avoid that when the killer hunts you in your dreams? Nightmare has to take the final point again, just for how scary its very concept is.
Just stay awake and watch me. Just wake me up if it looked like I was having a bad dream. And what did you do? You shit. You fell asleep.
I figured Nightmare would win, but I didn't figure it'd be this one-sided. This video might make it look like the original Friday the 13th is a bad movie, but as far as slasher films go, you could really do a lot worse. The makeup and Betsy Palmer's performance are worth watching this movie alone. In many ways, Friday the 13th is the ultimate example of one of these types of slasher films. A formula so reliable that essentially the first 3 Friday the 13th movies follow it rigidly. It just can't compare to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. That being said, the original Nightmare is arguably the best of that franchise, while Friday the 13th doesn't hit its high point until part 4. So continuing with this series will likely see some shifts between the franchises.
Get out of here now, Tracy, now!
Hey, you forgot the Power Glove!
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.